Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Venture Outfitter. I am Kevin Coyne, founder of Tech Ranch. We're going to hop in and talk a little bit about Austin with one of Austin's finest. Thom Singer is going to be joining us today. And first off, just want to say thank you for joining the Venture Outfitter. The whole idea about this program is to connect entrepreneurs around the world, support them in building the relationships, resources, and tools that they need to connect, to go change the world and facilitate that. We're going to be doing a lot of different activities. I will be in Italy, in Florence, specifically on September 14th. Actually, I'll be there September 11th through the 16th. The whole idea is the city of Austin's kicking off a sister city relationship with Florence. Real excited about that. And Tech Ranch will be driving the business side of that set of relationships. I'm real excited about that. So make a long story short, if you have interest in being tied into Florence, please join us. Let me know about your interest and we can do that. We're going to get, we usually do some of our announcements towards the end of the program, but today we have one of our special entrepreneurs from the Czech Republic. He's actually a Texan from the Czech Republic who is driving an event called Invest in Bravery. Since he's on and he's going to have to leave, David Nichols, if you could hop on and tell us about this event that's happening in Kyiv in Ukraine, October 19th.
Oh, thank you so much, Kevin, for showing that to everybody. Basically, it's a second event we're doing to support Ukraine during the war. Their economy shrunk by almost 40% because of the war. One thing that's really interesting to know is that their IT and tech sectors, which are very strong in Ukraine, actually grew despite the war. So you've probably seen pictures of Ukrainian entrepreneurs in bunkers with laptops and stuff like that. Those stories are true. The idea that I got for this was in Barcelona for Mobile World Congress, and I met some of those Ukrainian entrepreneurs that had companies that they were profitable, that they had founded actually during the war. So anyway, this one's going to be about investments and startups, and we are partnering with a company called Startup Disrupt, and I was at one of their events last night here in Prague, and they do really amazing stuff for the startup community. They're going to have a tour around the CEE region, and the final and like the most important event is going to be in Kyiv during the war in the capital. So anybody that wants to join us is welcome. It is an incredible experience to support Ukraine during the war. It is not, of course, something the State Department is going to recommend you to do, or probably your significant other, unless they have strong feelings about it. They might object to it as well. But we're welcome to, especially if you're an investor, but anybody that wants to stand with us for Ukraine, the values that Ukraine is fighting for, democracy, the rule of law, the right of self-determination, all these things, basically the Western values. Welcome to join us, and thank you very much, Kevin.
Yeah, thank you for joining us, and thanks for standing for that. Last week's program, I spoke a lot about how the rule of law, one of the things that we just kind of assume to be there in the United States is things like the rule of law and just having justice and stuff like that. And we forget that that's what enables us to actually be able to be entrepreneurs. And so I think it's important to actually to recognize, celebrate, as well as support those that might not have the same access. So to our brother and sister entrepreneurs in Ukraine, we're excited to support this event, and thanks, David, for doing that. Have a great afternoon. One of our Texans that's living in the Czech Republic that's supporting entrepreneurs in Ukraine. So thank you for that. We'll just get back into this whole idea about building bridges, whether it's to Italy, to Ukraine, to the Czech Republic, to other parts. Today, I noticed in the studio audience, we have entrepreneurs from Poland, from Austria. We're going to hear from an Austrian a little bit. Others from Texas, looks like Mexico, and other parts of the United States, and other parts of the world. Part of the thing that we want to do is continue to actually figure out how to build these kind of connections. I'm convinced that if we really want to move the world forward, the power of the market, the power of entrepreneurship is the way we do this. And so just to kind of set some tone as we prepare for the future, what can we learn from Austin's past and create for Austin's future? Now we're going to hear from one of Austin's, top leaders about this, but I thought that I'd take a moment to say, first off, let's look at economic development. There's this concept in economic development, the historical measures of economic development were there more jobs created or less jobs created? And, did you create more jobs? But a lot of times the problem with that frame was a lot of times jobs that were created, like say flipping burgers at a McDonald's, was actually counted alongside with entrepreneurial jobs that are being created. And then, did the tax base increase or not? The new measures that we're seeing, and I've been speaking to entrepreneurial ecosystem leaders across the world about this, is really it's about entrepreneurship and innovation, the things that you all are doing, as well as connectivity between ecosystems. A lot of times I mention the whole example of the city of Detroit. City of Detroit used to be the top technology capital of the world for 60 years. And then all of a sudden that came to a halt sometime in the 80s. And you have to ask yourself, what happened? What was it that happened? So we have to start really paying attention to this. This whole idea of this network that's being built out, this is essential for us to be conscientious about how we build this forward and what we do to actually tie things together, because it really is about, for me, it's about Austin, but I actually think that the things that we've learned in Austin, we can carry to the world. So that's one of the reasons that I was really excited when I was talking to Thom Singer. Thom is the CEO of the Austin Technology Council. He's been involved in Austin since, I think, 1991. We'll get a few more details from him about that. But met him when he was at one of the banks. He was definitely very involved in the building of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. A lot of times he's another one of the original gangsters of the space. Make a long story short, I thought that this would be great. I know a lot of you know about how I promote Austin and I talk about Austin and I sing the praises of Austin. But I think as we look at, we're creating the future, and in this question about how do we create the future, there's something that Austin figured out, right? We figured out because we went from not listed as an entrepreneurial capital of the world to, in the top three. And we want to make sure that we sustain that, but it's not just about Austin. It's about how is it that we use these technologies, these tools, this connectivity that I'm speaking of to build a better world. All right, well, with that, Thom, welcome to joining. It's great to actually have you here on the program. From one original gangster of Austin to another original gangster of Austin. Tell us all about it. How are you doing today?
Well, today I'm doing great. I was laughing. You just showed that photo. That photo of the skyline is like 15 years old. There's like half the buildings are missing on that picture that you just flashed up there of Austin. So that's just a reminder of, how fast Austin's growing. Pictures that we took a couple of years ago don't even look like Austin now.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of funny that I took that wild kayaking in 2019, and I realized that as well. I thought, oh, this is a recent, this is a picture of Austin, the Austin that I love. But yeah, it's crazy how radically fast things have changed. What do you think's driving that change? Like what's driving all the activity and things like that? What do you have to say about that?
Well, I kind of refer to it as this Austin miracle, right? If you go back just 30 years, the greater Austin area had a population of about 700,000 people, and it now has something like 2.3 million people. So that's a 3 times increase for the larger metropolitan area in just 3 decades. And if you look at the city, when I moved to Austin in July 91, the city was the 30th largest city in the United States for just like within the city limits of Austin. It was about 400 and something thousand people, if I remember correctly. It was a mid-sized town. We now just became this year the 10th largest city in the United States. We overcame the city of San Jose, California, for having more residents inside our city. So these things have happened. They've happened very fast. But the thing is, they didn't happen by accident. If you go back 30, 40 years, we had a series of community leaders who, I'm sure that these people had their own agendas and their own ideas. I'm sure some of them didn't like each other, just like today. However, they all had a vision of what they could create to make Austin this economic driven city, driven by technology as technology was booming. People were looking to the future saying, what does a major city that is a tech hub look like in 30 years? I don't think they could have imagined what we're living in 2023. I think when you go back and look at people like, Carol Thompson, Pike
Yeah, Mike
Powers,
Powers,
George Kosmitsky,
Yeah, exactly.
Laura Kilcreast. I mean, the list, there's probably about 25 names if we delve into it, who all were pushing for how do we grow Austin? And you're right with what you said in the introduction, that at the time it was jobs and tax base, but that changed over time to really becoming this attractive economic center. And South by Southwest helped with that. The growth of the activities of our chamber, and then Opportunity Austin added to that. Organizations like Capital Factory and Tech Ranch and so many of the Founders Institute, so many that really focused on helping startups really get what they needed to grow and thrive. And then, the companies that service the tech companies, the law firms, the banks, the venture capitalists, the consultants, et cetera, they weren't here 30 years ago. And now we have everything that a startup could need to go from startup to growth-oriented company to large national or multinational company. And again, like I said, that didn't happen by accident. It happened because people were saying, where are we today? What do we need to be better, stronger, bigger, and successful and sustainable into the future? And so we're here. And I think one of the things we need to do is start asking those questions all over again.
Well, so I really want to dig in on that. But before we do that, tell us a little about the Austin Technology Council. This role that you've taken on in the organization. Tell us a little about the history, what it does now. And also, since some of our listener base is from around the world, how is it relevant to what they're up to?
Sure. So the Austin Technology Council was founded 31 years ago as the Austin Software Council. It was founded by George Kosmitsky and spun out of the Austin Technology Incubator. So UT was sort of behind the launching of this. And the idea was two things. Number one, to put technology on the map as the future economic driver of our community of Central Texas. Well, obviously, we don't have to educate anybody now that technology is the economic driver of Austin and of Central Texas. The second thing was to bring the community together, allow people to meet. Because here's the thing, when we have more community, more collaboration, and more conversations, that's when great things can happen. So the Austin Technology Council was one of the first organizations 31 years ago, really looking at tech. In fact, back then we used to call it high tech. And there wasn't sort of stages of like, well, that person's more successful than this person, or that person's doing software and this person's doing hardware. It was a community that everybody would rise. That rising tide would surely lift all boats. And so we were founded to bring the community together, help educate people, and be that thread that ran through the entire business community as different groups popped up. So as you have different groups, we don't need these organizations to be competitors. We need everybody who's serving the tech industry to find ways to work together. So over 31 years, the ATC has had different looks and different people running it and different boards. I was hired a year ago to reinvent it and really look towards what is the future of Austin? How does the technology community come together? And do we have that thread that runs through medtech and fintech and startups and growth companies and multinationals? And we don't. And so that's what ATC, as we're reinventing it, and I have some really great people on my board who are starting to think, what do we want Austin to look like in 10, 20, 30 years? Because if we're not asking those questions, we'll get whatever we get. And we've seen that happen in other places where they grow and they grow and they grow, and they don't really have a sense of community. They don't have that vibe. And we want to make sure that Austin never loses sort of that cohesive vibe, that we're all here. I always say Austinites have an unnatural love affair with Austin. If you go back to the 1990s, there were other cities that boomed faster than we did with population and building. There was parts of Florida, there was Las Vegas, there was Phoenix. And when the bust came at the end of the 90s, people moved out of those cities really fast. I mean, the population grew, but people were walking away from mortgages. That never happened in Austin. Number one, we had sort of a slow, steady growth. And number two, we accepted and assimilated all the people who came to Austin, and they grew to love what Austin had as a great place to live, as a great place to work, as a great place to raise a family. And so I always say Austinites have this unnatural love affair with Austin, but in the last 10 years, we've absorbed 1 million people. So we have to be thinking about how do we make sure that those people feel connected to our community, feel that they have opportunities, and feel that they really have roots in this community. Because if things go awry, and that does happen in the economy, it's been a long time now since we've had a major recession. It goes back to, really 2009 since we've had a big hit. But when that happens, if it hit our area, we want people to plant their flag and say, no, I'm staying here. I got laid off. I'm starting my own business. I'm doing something like that. Because it's that entrepreneurial spirit and that connection to this community that has made Austin thrive for the past 30 years.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because in the introductory slides, I talked about Detroit. Detroit during that 2008, 2009 timeframe had greater than 14% unemployment. It was you had houses that were just being abandoned in the middle of the town center, and is interesting for me. I got my degree at UT. I have an engineering degree, graduated with honors, but at the time, originally, 1990, I couldn't get a job in Austin. It kind of was really kind of hard, and I think back because there was another downturn for those of y'all that weren't alive at the time. There was another downturn at that time. And so even, top of the line, electrical engineering grad from UT can't get a job. Whereas now you walk out and, there are, I don't mean it disrespectfully. I guess I'm about to say there are kids walking out with engineering degrees, just freshly minted, that, are getting $100,000 salary straight out of UT. It's kind of crazy when you look back at it. What do you think we have to do? I mean, actually, I think there are a lot of people that are listening that have no idea about this, what makes Austin, this vibe, the vibe that, even though I worked for a Steve Jobs company, I was out in the Bay Area after getting that degree, and I wanted to come back so bad. I mean, I know that, but give a little bit more color about this feeling of what do you think made Austin? It's not the 105-degree weather that we have right now, right? What is it? Say a little bit more about that, because I think that this is something that's not unique to only being possible in Austin, but what are the component parts of that?
Well, I think there were a lot of parts, and more than I probably know. Every time I speak, I've created a talk that I'm doing for some tech conferences that come to town. I presented it at Capital Factory yesterday. I've done it for a bunch of Rotary clubs, called The History of Austin Tech, because a lot of our people, and when I say younger, I don't necessarily mean that they're in their 20s, but they're newer to town. Many people who've gotten into the business world or come to Austin in the last decade, they don't know the history of how Austin got. They just know it was a boomtown and it was cool and it had this weird vibe. And, there were so many things that played into that. If we got in a time machine and went back 30 years, Austin was really a place where old hippies came and musicians and artists, and it was inexpensive to live. I moved from Northern California in July 91, and I was blown away. My rent was like a third of what it had been, in California. Now, 1990 numbers, that was lower in California and lower here, but it was much cheaper. Things like yogurt cost 40% less because of some of the different taxes and things that were in place. So it was so affordable. Now we've lost some of that, but that affordability was a huge part of what brought people to Austin. The second thing was Texans by nature are extremely friendly. We call it the Lone Star State, but if you actually look at the nickname of Texas, it's the friendly state. And Texans are very welcoming. I can remember the first condo that we rented up on Far West. My wife and I rented this 2-bedroom condo. In fact, she was my girlfriend when we moved here. We rented this condo, and one day we were talking to the neighbors, and they were a couple who were about my age now, mid-50s, and they were very nice. Their kids were grown, and they'd come over to borrow something, and they noticed we didn't have a dining room table. Well, we were young. We couldn't afford it. You couldn't just order things online because that didn't exist. And, so we just didn't have a dining room table. The next day they rang the doorbell, and in their truck, they had a dining room table. They had gone to their storage unit. They didn't know us. We'd lived there a month. They went to their storage unit, got a dining room table out of storage, brought it to us and said, look, you can have it as long as you live here or we live here, because it was just sitting in storage. And that was my first introduction about a month after I got here to just how open and welcoming Austinites were to people who were coming to town. So I think that had a lot to do with it. Another thing is that you had sort of the Dell effect. And of course, it wasn't just Dell, but if you go back to the 80s and the early 90s, you had the explosion of Dell, of Tivoli, and of Trilogy. And those three companies made a lot of money, made a lot of people wealthy, but it did two things. it spun out a lot of entrepreneurs. They watched their bosses at Dell, at Tivoli, at Trilogy. They watched their bosses build businesses and they're like, I want to do that. So there was leading by example of companies that were growing, and some people got wealthy because they had stock in these companies and they became investors. So the Central Texas Angel Network appeared, and all of a sudden you had all of this ability for entrepreneurs to get some early access to cash that hadn't existed if you went back, previous to the early 90s or the 80s. So all of a sudden these things started to gel around 1997. At the same time, if you think back about 97, and I'm not sure of the exact years, but Netscape went public, and that was not obviously not in Austin, but it was in technology, and it exploded the next 3-4 years of everything in tech. And Austin was able to have some of that because we had that entrepreneurial spirit. Also, if you go back to the mid 90s, South by Southwest changed, or began its change, from being known as a music conference to being known as a tech conference. And in the interim, there was the beginnings of South by Southwest Interactive. Thousands, tens of thousands of people in the late 90s were coming to Austin for a week in March. And if you come mid-March for a week, Austin, Texas has better weather than San Diego. Yes, we have that for 15 days, but we have the most amazing weather you could have in the country in the middle of March. And we would bring tens of thousands of people. People would look at our housing prices. You could buy a house for $150,000 in the 90s. And they would look at the cost of living. They would look at this burgeoning economic center and this entrepreneurial spirit. And they're like, I want to move there. And then around August, they would move and it would be 109 in the shade with, 80% humidity. And they'd be like, what have I done?
Yeah.
So there was that. And then there was this connectivity. There was this human factor that existed in Austin, where networking wasn't just a thing, it was a lifestyle. And you could have a 3 name tag day in Austin because we didn't have this large geography. You could go to a breakfast at the Four Seasons, a lunch at the Arboretum at the Renaissance Hotel, and then you could go to a happy hour somewhere else, downtown or wherever. And I called it a 3 name tag day because you'd be slapping name tags on your chest, at every meal. But you could get around. We didn't have bad traffic. There was always parking, and the geography was small enough that you could do that. So people met each other. And the serendipity, because it was a smaller community in general and a smaller tech community, you would go out to dinner at Z Tejas or Sullivan's or something, and you would see other people from the tech community. So you'd run into your friends. There was the plane flight, the direct flight from Austin to San Jose that American Airlines had, and eventually Southwest took that route over. We called it the Nerd Bird because people in Austin were doing business with the Silicon Valley, and they were flying out and back regularly. And you'd get on that plane and you'd see it was packed with all of your tech friends. Now you get on a plane, how often do you run into somebody you know? It's not as often because we're so much bigger. And then our Chamber of Commerce started doing these visits back in the 90s where they would go look at towns that had grown quickly for a variety of reasons, and they would learn from them. They would visit the Silicon Valley in New York and Boston, places where there were tech companies, and they would tell them, come to Central Texas. It's less expensive. Your employees can have a better way of life, and that. And then in the early 2000s, Opportunity Austin was founded out of the Chamber of Commerce, and they started raising money to be able to really recruit these big companies who were bringing their jobs and their headquarters to Austin. So you asked a loaded question, and I went on for like 8 minutes on that, but there were a lot of little pieces that none of them alone were enough to create this Austin miracle. They all had to come together in a perfect storm, and they had to be led by the vision of civic leaders who really cared about the future and thought we could create something if we did it together.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting as another person that got to live that whole experience, and a little bit of time out in Silicon Valley, and that ended up having me want to come back to the environment you're talking about. And Silicon Valley had that density. Austin, we did all those networking events because we needed to create connective tissue among us, because the density that I remember being in Gordon Biersch Brewery in Palo Alto and seeing one guy spill beer on another guy, and then a startup got formed, right? I mean, I remember thinking.
So I've got to jump in. I've got to interrupt you because Gordon Biersch originally had 2 locations, Palo Alto and downtown San Jose. And you're right that when you randomly meet somebody in a Gordon Biersch, great things happened. I met my wife in the Gordon Biersch in San Jose, California in January of 1991. And a startup wasn't founded, but a marriage of 31 years was, and two great daughters who are about to take over the world now that they're adults.
Wow, that's interesting. I just remember being there, like my story is not that groundbreaking, but it was just like I remember thinking, wow, this is what an environment could be like. Someone spills beer on another guy and this is a true story. This is not a made up type of thing. It's like it was crazy. So I remember coming back to Austin and thinking, hey, there's got to be some way that we can actually do that. So I was one of the guys contributing to hey, let's have more events. Let's have more events. Let's get people together. And that's obviously what's created this environment now. And now we almost have the same level of density that you'd see in Silicon Valley. Maybe not as many people, but certainly the same type of density. What's the state of the nation right now? The state of the nation of Austin?
I'm bullish on Austin, right? I took this job with the Austin Technology Council a year ago, and I was hired to reinvent this organization and to reinvent the community. And I believe in the Austin community. I believe that people do want to come together and support good causes. However, because we've had so many people come in, we haven't really effectively absorbed all of these people into that connectivity tissue, as you call it, or whatever. We talk about it a lot. You see different people in our community stand up and talk about how friendly Austin is and how welcoming Austin is. But when I go out and speak, or when I'm meeting people, I find a lot of people who tell me it's not true. I talk to a lot of people who've moved here in the last 4 or 5 years, and the pandemic didn't help, but they don't feel welcome. They don't feel like people want to hear them. They feel that there are these hierarchies that really do exist out in the valley, right? We always used to talk 15 years ago about the fact that you couldn't get to certain people in the valley because they were walled off. There were these ivory towers, or there was the curated groups where people who were CEOs of funded companies of a certain size would only go to events where other CEOs of similarly funded companies of a certain size were, because they didn't want to mingle with the riffraff. And in Austin, we laughed at that because we're weird. Austin, we're all the riffraff. Nobody felt better than anybody else. You could literally go in, to a networking event and meet somebody who had sold their company for, hundreds of millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars or whatever. And, you stand in line at a bar and they talk to you. And, I was the marketing director for a tech law firm, and they didn't say, oh, well, you're not actually a techie. No, the law firm that I worked for helped take that person public. And he was interested in what I was doing in marketing, because law firms didn't have marketing people. So that was very unique. Not now, they have marketing people now, but 22 years ago, they didn't. And so they were like, oh, tell me more. How did you create this job? And they had an interest in what I was doing, even though I wasn't funded, I wasn't a CEO, et cetera. I think we're losing some of that. And I'm hearing that from people. Again, when people talk about it and they say how friendly and welcoming we are, people come to me and they say that's not the experience I'm having. Now, I don't want to lead with that. And I don't think that the ship has sailed, but I think we really need to remember that what makes Austin great is this feeling of community collaboration and conversations. And yes, there are a time that you want to be sitting around a pool with just people who are just like you. But if people aren't going out and participating in the community, if they're not mentoring other people, if they're not supporting the different organizations that exist out there, like Tech Ranch, like Austin Technology Council, I mean, the list is extremely long. In fact, Austin has more nonprofit business organizations per capita than just about any city, because we're such an entrepreneurial city that when someone says, oh, the chamber didn't do this or ATC didn't do this, they form their own group. What we need to start doing is getting all these groups to work together, to partner on events. And instead of forming a new group every time we have a new idea on how to serve the tech community, we need to go and work with the groups that exist. And again, really work to have everybody looking towards that same vision rather than competing with each other.
Yeah, it reminds me, one of the reasons that I left Silicon Valley is, in Silicon Valley, I could be in water technology and you could be in social media technology, right? Not even the same worlds for a competition, but we'd be at each other's throat, just like trying to choke each other out, right? It's just like, it's one of the reasons that Silicon Valley had got toxic. I mean, I don't want to totally knock Silicon Valley, because
there's many amazing,
yeah, there's things you can do out there that you can't do anywhere else. And since I did get, I got to work for a Steve Jobs startup, so I got to experience some of the stuff that, only happens out there. So I do want to make sure that everyone hears that I really respect what's happening out there. But we've talked about this in the past about, when you focus on status versus wealth creation happens in community, right? I help you, you help me. We do it together. Whereas the status game of, one up, one down, like the zero sum game, that 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 doesn't work long term. I mean, maybe some people like that. I'm a product.
If you have the highest levels of status, it works really well for you.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, it's funny because I think one of the reasons I came back to Austin is I kind of got sucked into that Austin hippie musician vibe, right? Where you walk into a bar or a club, and you actually talk to the artist that ends up becoming the multi-gazillionaire, but is still really accessible. Like you're saying, we see this with some of our executives that have been really supportive of this. How do we bring this back? How do we bring, I mean, I agree with you. We haven't lost it totally, but I'm concerned we've absorbed a number of people, and it's kind of a twofold question, right? We've got 1 million people that we need to indoctrinate, but then part of my goal, by the way, and I'll disclose it so that it's visible to everyone listening, is how do we actually, put our arms around the world to actually create more of that inclusive culture? What are your thoughts, both for Austin and for the world?
Well, I think the world is changing. I think that this competition between cities and these hubs that are competing for the jobs and things like that, I don't know how it's going to change, but I think it's changing. I think the way we built Austin over the last 30 years is not the way another city will build their future success, right? So there is a organization called TECNA. It's the Technology Councils of North America. And there are about 90 plus technology councils in cities and regions all over North America. 66 of them belong to this organization called TECNA. When I came into ATC a year ago, I noticed we had this thing. There was a membership, and I thought, well, what is this? But I am a believer in associations and community. And I think that if we try to reinvent the wheel every time someone new comes on board, I think that we bang our head against the wall and we end up with a lot of failures. So I believe in leading from people who are doing cool things. So I got super involved since we had a membership. I got super involved with TECNA, and I've had the pleasure of meeting many of these tech councils all over the United States and Canada. And I still have my own business as a professional speaker at corporate events. And so about once a month, I'm not doing it full time anymore, but I still go out and speak on this idea of community and collaboration and how to build your network and why it matters to everyone in the company and why it's a retention tool. So if I'm speaking in Pittsburgh, I go and set up a half-day meeting with the Pittsburgh Technology Council. Same thing with Arizona or Nashville or Columbus, Ohio, or wherever I've been. And I can learn a lot from what these other regions are doing and how they're looking at growth. And, 10, 15 years ago, they all benchmarked what did Austin do to grow. And now a lot of them are looking at a new blueprint because they don't think they can recreate. I mentioned all those things that sort of happened. Can't recreate a perfect storm. So they're looking at, how do we do this? What's interesting is when I look at these tech councils and these growing tech centers, these ones who are trying to knock down the barriers to being a tech hub, as you said, we're in the top 3 or 5, technology centers in the world, and nobody doubts that. But these other cities that want to create jobs, they want to grow their entrepreneurial spirit. They want people to move there who are young and hungry to start companies. A lot of them have extremely large, really robust technology councils with, staffs of, 8 and 12 and 15 people. And they have all of their big companies supporting them financially so that they can be doing these things. We're trying to rebuild. We don't have that. I'm the only person on staff right now, and I'm still trying to get companies to come on and look to this future cause and help us create the next vision of what we're doing. And I'm kind of competitive. I don't like the fact that when you look at technology councils of North America, that Austin doesn't have one of the strongest ones. So I'm really pushing, personally for our community to find ways to come together and support what is that next phase. So I think we can learn from these other cities. And if we look at some of these cities like, they don't have what we have, they'll never have what we have, we're going to miss the boat. So I think we need to look to the other cities that are growing and looking at how they change their economy and make it more of a tech-focused economy over the years, both in the United States and with what you're doing around the world, because I think that success leaves clues. And if we're too quick to believe our own press and think, well, we're one of the top tech centers in the world, as things change, we may or may not be prepared. I don't know what those changes are. I don't have a crystal ball, but I do know, you mentioned Detroit, I mentioned Phoenix and Las Vegas and different boom towns sometimes follow a not so boomy town. And since July 91, Austin's never really had a bust. We've had some recessions, but we've never been affected. And part of that reason is we have an eclectic tech center. We have an eclectic economy now. So one sector can't take us all the way down. That being said, I think that we need to be having these conversations with and observations of other places and what they're doing, and find ways to get the big companies in our town to say, this is what we want. How do we come together and create the vision? How do we create the baby steps that lead us to what does the Austin of tomorrow look like? I don't hear it enough where people are saying, what is the Austin we want, in the next phase? I think we're all living this Austin miracle, and it's awesome. And, if you got here early enough, you've watched your house triple in price in the last, 20 years. But, and there's some additive to that. Somebody put in the comments that when the people come, the prices go up. And that's true. We're never going to be the affordable choice again. But as I said, when I listed all those things, affordability was a major thing that allowed us to grow the way we did. So if we take affordability out, we've got to be thinking about what are we adding to this equation that makes us awesome? Because I think the affordability ship has sailed.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about, like the, especially with all the empty buildings downtown that, Google and Facebook both have decided, hey, here's 700,000 square feet, each one of them, by the way, we're just gonna not move into. And so, yeah, there's some changes that, we've got a lot of changes that are going on.
Well, that brings up a really interesting point, and that is changes that are happening in our society, right? After the pandemic, everybody worked remote, and then we had 2 years of debate. Is remote better than in person? And people had some pretty damn strong ideas about, no, remote is the way, you're more productive. It's the only way. It's the greatest thing in the whole world. And other people were like, eek, bring everybody back to the office. It's the only way. It's the only thing we can do. I don't think there's an only anymore. I think the world has changed. I think what we went through in the pandemic has shown us that people can work remotely. So maybe you don't need 700,000 square feet. Maybe you only need 35. But I don't think that fully remote works for everybody. There are examples of companies who are fully remote pre-pandemic who are thriving, and they have great distributed teams. And there are examples of teams where they're like, we're losing our culture. I talked to a lot of people in Austin, a lot of CEOs who don't want to go on the record, but they're saying, I want to bring everybody back at least 4 days a week because we don't have the culture. We don't have that connectivity of people going to lunch together, people hanging out late and going to happy hour together. Gallup has done a poll for many, many years that if you have a best friend at work, you're going to stay at the company longer, work harder, and you're going to be more satisfied in your jobs. And so I talked to a lot of people who their job's fine, but they don't have any friends. They don't feel like they're connected. If another job came along, they're happy to go do that. So I think that these changes are happening in the way work happens. And I don't think we have an answer. And I don't think it's a one size fit all for all companies. But I think we have to be looking at, as the community change, and an Austin company can now hire 300 people all over the world to work for them. So they don't need to be in Austin, but at the same time, other communities can hire our people to work remotely from Austin. And that's great. But at the same time, our companies need access to the people in the jobs. I talked to one tech council, and they have an HR group. I won't say which one, but they have some big companies who support what they're trying to do. They're an up and coming region, but a region that has its own cool vibe. And they're large companies. Their strategy when they have to recruit techies is recruit from Austin, either for remote workers or to move them to where they are, because they said a lot of young people who moved there are willing to move for a better lifestyle if you can convince them. So they told me that, and I'm like, this is observational. I don't have it firsthand. I heard it secondhand. But I don't think that's good that other people are going, hey, Austin's the place to poach. It should be the other way around. We should be saying, come to Austin.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of things to figure out about that. Let's do this. Let's take a couple of different questions. We've had some questions on the streams, as well as we have Tom Evans, who's another long-term.
I love Tom Evans.
Has his hand raised. Tom, why don't you hop on Jello Spotlight too as well, and you had a question or a statement you wanted to make?
Well, you know what? One is Tom was bringing back a lot of the memories from the mid '90s time frame and relating back to that. But one of the questions that I just want to kind of toss this out, and maybe both Kevin and Tom have some thoughts on it, is I've had a chance to travel internationally, and one of the things when I was speaking to tech communities, and this would be going back a little bit ago, but all the companies said we want to go visit the Silicon Valley. And we want to be like the Silicon Valley. And I'm going like, not every, Silicon Valley had a special culture that, kind of a series of events that came together that created them. Why don't you look at Austin? And so, and I just kind of want to think is, as you're going out and talking, maybe more internationally, where are people looking and what are we doing as Austin to say, hey, come look at Austin?
Well, let me go first on that. Is I think the one thing we always said in Austin back to the 90s when this growth began, when Austin started to sort of be a blip on the map and then a dot on the map and then a big old circle on the tech map. I think one of the things was we always said we don't want to be the Silicon Valley. We don't want, we don't want everything to be like that. We want some of the good, but we want to be Austin. We want to have our own culture. We want to have our own vibe, and we want to have our own way of being able to do business. And I think all these other communities have to do that. I talked to the leader from a tech council in a city that's getting a lot of attention as sort of the next wave of growing tech centers. And their CEO of their tech council said their board is really on them to create something like South by Southwest. And I said, you can't go create something like South by Southwest because it happened organically. You talk to Hugh Forrest, the first year of South by Southwest Interactive was, hey, there's all these people doing things on CD-ROMs and stuff like that. And there's all this marketing taking, but we should have it. And there were hundreds of people who came, and the next year, hundreds more, and then thousands, and then it got up to the giant numbers that we saw, over the pre-pandemic years. You can't just plant a flag and say, we're having a tech festival and imagine everybody to come. There's a lot of people who try to put on big events, maybe not South by size, and they can't sell tickets. It has to have that word of mouth. It has to have that vibe. People have to want to be part of it. So you can't just say, we want to create a South by Southwest, then we'll be like Austin. That was one piece of those 10 or 12 perfect stormy things. So my advice to these other places is learn from the Silicon Valley. Do what our Chamber of Commerce did in the 90s. San Diego went through huge growth in the 80s and they hadn't built the infrastructure for it. So our chamber took leaders and went and visited with leaders in San Diego to see what they were doing to play catch up, because we knew we were going to have to play catch up. So it's not just attracting tech companies, it's learning from how these other cities have grown. And so I think that the answer is don't be the Silicon Valley, don't be Austin, be Pittsburgh, Nashville, San Diego, whoever you are, and have your vibe do it.
Yeah, it's interesting too. One of the other examples of things that I think really made a big difference as well is, South by was there, but then there was the bar camps. The bar camps are like, what is a bar camp? It's like many of us would actually just start these informal events. All these people are coming to Austin for South by Southwest. We do the informal events. And the informal events sometimes pulled more people in than the formal events. It's kind of a counterintuitive thing that I think that was really natural here because we have such a counterculture that a lot of other places never tapped into. They think that just having the big sessions with the big names actually really matters.
And Grace said in the comments, she was talking about the history. She's right. If you see the comments, South by Southwest did start as the music festival and the film festival. And this little tech thing came up. And it grew, and then the tech thing took it over. But again, you couldn't have planned that. They didn't sit down and, when they started South by Southwest so many years ago and said, this is the direction we're going to go. It grew organically. It was that sort of thing. So again, I think that we have to remember that, it didn't happen by accident, but there also was a little bit of serendipity that came together. And you're right. Many of those just local events, remember the high tech happy hour of the 1990s, those things you couldn't get into. They were so crowded, and you'd have funded CEOs, people who'd gone public, and people who worked as the receptionist at a tech company. I mean, it was a whole community coming together, and nobody was like, oh, well, I don't want to go to that because there's too many lawyers and bankers there. Well, no, if the lawyers and bankers were serving the tech community, everybody wanted to know them because they had ideas and they had partners in Silicon Valley, and they knew what was going on in tech. So these things, I don't think you can plan to become the next hotspot, but I think that you can do things to make sure that you're being accessible and inclusive so that those things can happen. And again, I think we need to be thinking about what do we have to do for the next 10 and 20 years to make sure that we create the best Austin.
Yeah, that cultural thing that you're saying about making environments, inclusive, accessible, where it's truly a wealth creation game, not a status game. I think that that's more important than, if I'm only, I came up with a hypothesis on a recent trip when I was giving a speech in Chile, and and I started doing some of the research behind it, and there's a lot of evidence that says that that's what's true. Let's see, Paulina has her hand raised. Paulina, what's your question?
Yes. Hi. Thanks, Tom. In addition to everything, what are your thoughts about the infrastructure? Because with the growth, we're seeing all the different projects for renovating I-35, right? And so given the fact that there's environmental factors that play a role into Texas specifically, it will not be feasible for us to build a subway as opposed to the way the East Coast has it. So I wanted to hear your thoughts about all of that.
Yeah, obviously getting people around is a huge problem. Our traffic pre-pandemic was considered like the third or fourth worst in the country, because I make the joke that, I tell people when I do this history of Austin tech speech that I give at different groups around town, I say, look, I moved here in 91. There were 700,000 people. There's now 2.3 million people, and we've built one road. And it always gets a big laugh. And yeah, we've built more than one road, but we haven't kept up with it. And even on the East Coast, I don't think you could build a subway system today like they did 50 and 100 years ago. So we are limited. We also have some water problems that we're never going to be able to necessarily fix. So I think unlimited runaway growth isn't something that we can have. But if you have a great place, people are going to come. So you have to be thinking about how can we handle it. I think we have to look for ways to, create growth. I mean, I think that we could have an above ground train system. My friends who live in Leander and work downtown, they ride that train every single day and they think it's the greatest, but you get there and you've got a 6-block walk to get into downtown to their building. That in August is a bit of a problem. So I think we need to be thinking those things through. I think this is what is great about being part of an entrepreneurial community with some of the smartest, innovative minds. We need to be coming together and having these conversations because we've got the brain power in Austin. People from the top universities in the world, live in Austin. We have one of the top universities in the world right down the street. I think that we need to be having these discussions, and we need to stop letting individuals feel like, okay, I have this agenda, you have that agenda, we can't be on the same team. Humans have had their own agendas forever and not necessarily got along. We need to put those differences aside and start talking about what can we do to go forward, because there's not one path to fixing the infrastructure. There's going to be a lot of things, because what works for you if you live in North Austin is going to be different than me to South Austin. I live in Circle C, and Mopac's my only way in. If there's an accident on Mopac, I can't get to downtown. When my daughter went to college in Pittsburgh, if there's an accident, there's 6 other roads that you can take to get around. We don't necessarily have that. So we need to be addressing it. I think that we need to be looking at, can we have more light rail? What can we do? And working remote is part of this. I noticed for sure that on Mondays and Fridays, my commute to my office, or if I'm going downtown to meet with somebody, Mondays and Fridays, I don't have a problem on Mopac North at 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the morning. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I need to leave at 6:30 because I got to beat that traffic. So, staggering work times, if people have to be in the office, staggering work times, is a way. In 1984, when the Olympics were in Los Angeles, everybody was petrified because Los Angeles had the worst traffic in the country. Everybody was petrified about what the traffic was going to be. You wouldn't be able to get to equestrian in Arcadia, or you wouldn't be able to get to basketball in Inglewood. It just wasn't possible. So all the big employers staggered their work time. You couldn't work remote in 1984. We didn't have an internet, but they staggered it. And I remember vividly, I was 18 years old. There was no traffic in Los Angeles for that 2-week period of the Olympics because people thought about what can we do that would make this different. That is just a microcosm of an example, but that's something that we could do here that will help with some of that traffic. Obviously, enlarging some of the freeways is important, doing that, but we can't add another 1 million people in the next 10 years to our community, which means we need to be thinking about what do we do with our community in that next decade.
Yeah, I mean, from my standpoint, I think our robot overlords will save us. What I mean by that is Cruise. There's a company called Cruise that is rolling out driverless vehicles. I know that in my case, it'd be great to actually just be able to hop in a driver's vehicle, get to wherever it's at. The operational cost is so much lower. Instead of putting $1 billion into a bond for more roads, let's just, let's make that type of stuff more accessible. Then, people that don't have the accessibility can take advantage of it as well. And it's good for all of us, something like that. And so, well, let's do this. So I'm going to give you a couple different things. We're going to do like a couple of real quick side note conversations for things. Thom, before I switch gears into the some of our closing slides, anything you want to say, like parting thoughts about Austin and stuff like that?
Yeah, there's one more thing we didn't get to that the Austin Technology Council is kicking around as one of our big initiatives, and that is making Austin a place where we embrace more diversity for founders and for tech leaders and things like that. We run a problem in technology that if you look at the amount of people who are funded, it tends to be, a bunch of middle-aged white men or younger, in that thing. But we need to be making sure that there's seats at the table for women and people of color, and that the opportunities are there. And our community has always been more progressive, than other places in the country. And I think that we talk a lot about it, but it hasn't changed that much over the last 2 years. So I think we need to have the leaders in this community, really having these conversations. That's why, and that's just one of many topics that I think we need to be addressing. But I think we need to be having roundtable discussions. We do a thing called the CEO Summit. This year, I've changed the name to the CEO/C-Suite Summit, where leaders come and we have panels and things like that. But last year, I added a roundtable discussion where we talked about issues that faced Austin, and we only gave them like 40 minutes, and it was the #1 part of the day. So this year we're going to do more of that at the CEO Summit so that people can talk about these issues, whether it's transportation, whether it's getting more diversity into that founder class, and, getting more diversity into the larger companies, into workforce, and allowing these people to get promoted into the higher leadership areas, whether it's the cost of living, whether it's what does Austin want to look like next. I mean, there's so many topics we need to be discussing as a group, and we need to be putting them out there and sharing them, because if we put our head in the sand and we don't think about these problems, then the problems are just going to get bigger. And we can look at cities like the Valley or Los Angeles or New York, and we can say, oh, they have all these problems. Well, we're going to have a lot of those problems if we don't start thinking about how do we, work to circumvent them from happening. And again, there's no magic wand to this. We're a town where I think that if you're a successful tech leader, you need to be showing up and participating, and not just because you're on a panel, but because you care about the community. And yes, there's a time to go have bourbon by your pool, but there's also a time to come to a Chamber of Commerce event or an Austin Technology Council event or something at Tech Ranch. Because if everybody shows their face occasionally, you don't have to do it every day, but if everybody shows their face occasionally, then everybody feels they can aspire to rise to that level and that the opportunities are there for them. If it's all behind a wall, I think that creates more problems.
Yeah, exactly. I definitely, there's a historical statement that I think Pike Powers, I heard him make, Pike Powers being one of the senior leaders that Thom was referring to earlier. He said, American exceptionalism doesn't stop, right? Or Austin exceptionalism, or let's just talk about the, empowered entrepreneurship. You take the problem, you embrace it, you actually respond to it. Well, Thom, let's do this. We're going to hop in with one of our entrepreneurs. We'll give you one more note right at the very end to share your wisdom about, kind of the inside thing, which you're going to say to entrepreneurs. But part of what we'll do before we do that, we'll just hop over real quick back to the slides. The question that I'm going to actually have as a follow-on question to everyone that's in the community site, and everyone here is welcome to be in the Tech Ranch community site. If you're not in the community already, go to techranch.com/connect, sign up for the community. Part of what we'll do is we'll ask Thom to be involved for the next week. He's not going to, a lot of times people come to me and they say, hey, connect me to today's speaker. In Thom's case, you can find him at Austin Technology Council. If you want to ask a question following up on this, or even more importantly, I think is like, answer this question when you get involved with the today's thread. What do you want to contribute to Austin and the world's future? I mean, the main thing about it is to this idea about engaging with the problems that are there, with whether you're in Austin or some other part of the world. We do have a guest today. He happens to be here in Austin as well, from Austria. This is pictures of Marcus. We took him out to an Austin FC game. What is Austin FC for those of you all that are out in the world? And Marcus, don't worry, I didn't get any of the other photos. I just the ones where we're having a lot of fun. The Austin FC is our soccer for Americans, or football for the rest of the world. Had a really great time, but he is here working on his venture. I told him I'd give him just a minute to just say what he's up to, anything else he'd like to share. Marcus, tell us about your venture really quick and what you're up to.
Hi, Kevin. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so we have to, Hallo Sophia is Hallo Sophisticated Advice. It's the booking portal for expert advice. So if you want a specialized consultation, this is the way to go. Don't ask your friends to recommend someone, just book it online like you do everything else these days. And so obviously the US is a great market for us, great opportunity. Everybody, you talk about the Silicon Valley. When we in Europe talk about a better place for startups, we talk about the US in general. And Austin has a quite good reputation. That's why I'm here. Kevin giving me the Texas onboarding, Texas startup mindset onboarding this week. Not sure if I even want to go to San Francisco next week after what Thom and Kevin mentioned about the valley, everybody going on each other's throat. But we'll see. I will see that myself next week.
I didn't mean to paint it as bad. I think you're going to have a great time.
Yeah, we'll see.
There is some very special things that happen in the valley. There indeed, there's just like the thing that I think that I like to make sure we say is, and we see this across the world, right? I've been in 28 countries over the last 6 years, as an example. Entrepreneurship and innovation, which used to be only in ivory towers out in Silicon Valley and maybe one or two other places, it shifted to Austin. It's now shifting to the world. It's a great thing. That being said, it's good to have Marcus here plugging into the environment here, as well as because the environment here and the environment out in Silicon Valley, there's something that we can learn from these different cultural frames. I've said it 1,000 times, if not more, that part of the value of being on an airplane connecting to these different cultures is we can learn the best from the technologies, the people, the style, the cultural insight. I am a fundamentally different person for all the time that I spent when I launched a venture in Chile and when I launched a venture in Mexico. I am a fundamentally different person, and I think a better person for that. So Marcus, any other thoughts you want to say, shout outs, requests that you make?
Yeah, regarding learning, I mean, one of the things I noticed is in Austin is more focused on impact innovation in the sense that how we understand it. We see ourselves, of course, business potential is unicorn, but on the other side, we want to improve the world. And in Europe, we see this, there is whether you go the pure capitalist way, you want to be a unicorn, you're kind of a little bit bad if you want to do that, or you are a non-profit. So, and this concept of changing the world and earning money at the same time, I think that was the main reason to come to Austin, by the way. So that was the external perspective of the Austrian Chamber of Commerce, that for this kind of mindset, Austin would be the best place to be. Shout out. So we operate the portal for expert advice. I mentioned that already. And it's all about partnerships with consulting firms, those who advise on a daily basis. So we want to collaborate. We share our technology to make online advisory more efficient, and we just want to collaborate. So whoever banks, consulting firms, whoever advises people with more than 10 people in a company or network, reach out to me. I would be happy to do a pilot together. And yeah, that's it.
That sounds great. Yeah. So the company name, Hallo Sophia, HALLO Sophia, SOPHIA.com.
I want to say he brings up a really interesting point, and that is the fact that you can be super successful financially and economically and have an impact on the world. I'm reading the biography of George Kosmetsky right now, and I've referred to him earlier. He's kind of the godfather of what happened in tech. He recruited MCC and Cimatech here in the 80s, and was the dean of the business school at UT. He'd also founded a large tech company, and had taught at Carnegie Mellon before that. And his biography is called A Civic Entrepreneur. I haven't gotten through the book. It's pretty thick and it's written by an academic, but it's fascinating because the one thing that you can see early on, I'm still at the early stages of his life. He still hasn't gotten to Austin, the part of the book I'm in, but he really believed that, you know, you need to find ways to give back. And I love the title of A Civic Entrepreneur. I think that all of our entrepreneurs, whether they are a startup with an idea or they're a multinational company, should be looking about how do I have impact? And when he said that, I thought, that's right.
That's perfect. Well, hey, Thom, we're going to put you on the spot for one more question before we close up for the day. What's the one thing out of all your experience, your travel, your speaking career, your, you know, early entrepreneur experience in Austin, as well as leading the Austin Technology Council, what's the one thing you'd say to entrepreneurs that's like kind of the inside insight from your specific scar tissue that you want to donate to the rest of the world, the entrepreneurs that are listening here? What might that be?
It's that all opportunities in life come from people, right? So, I mean, that's, you know, you hear the old cliche, people do business with people they know, they like, and they trust. And people say, well, that's a cliche, but all cliches are based on truth. And so, you know, if they don't know you, you're not going to find the opportunity. If they don't like you, they're not going to give you the opportunity. And if they don't trust you, they're not going to want to go into business with you or hire you or do whatever. So it's important that you're connecting with people and not being judgy. I mean, humans are naturally judgy, right? It's a protection mechanism that's built into us. But, you know, if you look at somebody and think, well, they don't have enough to be in my circle, you might be limiting, you know, the serendipity that comes along. Now, not everybody you meet are you going to have that love connection. You're not going to like everybody. You're not going to trust everybody. You're not going to understand what everybody's goals and things are. But I think we need to get to that remembrance that the serendipity of the people you meet. I mean, the only thing that's going to change you once you reach a certain age and you've stopped your formal learning is the learning that you go after. And that can be through watching podcasts and, you know, reading books and things like that, or it's the people who you meet. There was a famous professional speaker, he's long passed away now, called Charlie Tremendous Jones. And he said, the only thing that changes you are the books you read and the people you meet. Well, there's more than books now, but it's the learning you go after, and it's the people you meet. And I am a real big believer that we need to really look for connections. We need to be respectful. We need to listen to people, and we need to try and help people. If you think, oh, I'm meeting all these people, how will they help me? My first question is, when's the last time you connected someone to somebody and they got a kick-ass opportunity? They were able to sell their product if they were in sales, or if they owned a company, they were able to find somebody to collaborate with. They got a new job. Have you been the conduit, the catalyst that has allowed someone else to have something good happen? Not even great, just good happen in their life. And if you can't remember the last time you did it, why would you think anyone would do it for you? So lead by example, introduce people, find out what they need, ask them what their biggest challenge is in their organization, and then help them solve it. And if you do that, you'll be on their radar. I'll tell you, the people who step up and help me in hard times and hard times that I have right now, I never forget it. And that's true, I think, of everybody. I'm not everybody. Some people will take and take and take and not give back. But I think most people are good at heart. So if you go out of your way to help be the connector, to help be the person who helps them find a path to their dream, then even if they're not the one who helps you, someone else will see it and be like, I want to be around that person because they're a giver. Let's face it, the world is full of takers and the givers are getting sick of it. So, you know, the givers are watching. They're looking to see who are the other people out there who want to raise up that tide and lift all boats. And those are the people they're going to bring opportunities to. So more connection.
Yeah, that is a beautiful statement about that whole reason that I came back to Austin, that the creating opportunity for others only takes 5 minutes a day. 5 minutes and you can change someone else's life. Invest 5 minutes per day. Hey, Thom, that's a beautiful statement. Thank you for joining today. Thank you for the work you do. I'm really excited about the idea of working side by side with you on, you know, TechCrunch and Austin Technology Council, and in our larger networks on about uniting Austin and kind of reigniting this this thing that we both fell in love with Austin and carrying it to the world. So thank you for that. Okay, well, so we'll just wrap up for today. Just a reminder to everyone that if you're not connected into the Tech Ranch network and you want to be, there's a bunch of different places to plug into, techranch.com/connect. If you have mentorship that you want to share with entrepreneurs, if you want to sign up for our community for free, make sure you do so there as well. There's a place if you're in another country and you want to connect this work, you want to see a venture bridge get built to your country, your part of the world. There's a place to sign up as a country manager. Just let us know. There's a lot of different ways. The whole idea about this network is we're going to take the connected tissue concept that I learned in Austin that Thom was speaking about and extend it to the world. I'm convinced that with all the disruptions about what's happening in the world, this is the time to do so. What we'll do is, if you want to follow on, Thom actually shared his contact information for the studio audience. You can also go to the community site if you're in the larger world and you want to make sure you ask some follow-up questions. What we do is we ask our speakers to come into the community to pay attention to the threads for about a week. Afterwards, there will be a thread that will have this video. And a lot of times those conversations can be very dynamic and lead to other interactions and future things. If you have other ideas, next week, what we're going to do, I didn't announce this earlier, but next week we will have a kind of a community all swim. That is, we're going to have different people from the community say, hey, this is what they're up to. A lot of times entrepreneurs that have been involved over the last 20 years for Tech Ranch or in the last, 6 months will actually just say, hey, this is what I'm working on. If you would like to be a part of that, the main thing is to let us know that you'd like to, because we'll have a handful of slots. Jello, our producer behind the scenes, will be sending out that message, just so you know. I want to thank Thom once again, because this feeling, he had me on his podcast, and this feeling about what unites Austin and how do we unite it even farther, that actually put the basis of the vision of Tech Ranch together for me. I'm excited to have that feeling reinvigorated by his input. So definitely let us know if you'd like to be connecting into the work that he's doing, the work that Tech Ranch is doing. We'd love to do that. It's always my honor to be a part of a community of entrepreneurs that are driven by vision and values. Let's go change the world for the better together. Y'all take good care. Thanks, Thom.